Hello everyone, buongiorno a tutti. Benvenuti, vedo che siete molto numerosi e spero che arriveranno anche altre persone. Nel frattempo faccio una breve introduzione in italiano, ma prima una breve frase in inglese. Good morning everyone, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, don't really know. So welcome to our presentation today. I will very briefly make a presentation in Italian and then follow up with an English presentation, and then we will have our discussion of Giulia Sarno's book together in English, together with Laura Zattra, Teruggi, and Miriam Akkermann. So here the Italian. Quindi benvenuti alla presentazione del libro di Giulia Sarno, che verrà introdotto a breve. Io sono qui per introdurre le presentazioni dei libri che vengono fatte attraverso RiSME digitali, diciamo il gruppo di studio dedicato alla musica elettronica più ampiamente definita, ideato da Giacomo Albert e Laura Zattra. Siamo oggi, mi sembra, alla nostra quinta presentazione già, ma gli eventi sono stati molto di più e li trovate nel nostro sito, sono stati tutti registrati e potete vedere gli eventi passati sul link che verrà brevemente messo nella chat. Gli eventi di solito sono veramente dei luoghi di scambio e di dialogo, non sono troppo rigidi, quindi l'evento di oggi in particolare avrà delle domande che sono state preparate da diciamo i dialoganti, ovvero Miriam Akkermann, Laura Zattra e Teruggi. Ringraziamo Giacomo Albert per la meravigliosa assistenza tecnica ad ognuno di questi eventi, quindi sempre presente nel background, ma assolutamente necessario, e ringrazio Giulia Sarno per aver accettato l'invito di presentare il suo libro con noi. And now we start in English, so welcome again everyone. We are now at our number 5, our 5th book presentation, supported by RiSME digitali, the study group created within the Italian Musicological Society by Giacomo Albert and Laura Zattra. And the activities of the group are do not pertain exclusively the book presentation, but they are various and with several important events that you can see that have been recorded, and you can see them in our website that has been posted in the chat. And they're all very interesting, so please do check them out. So today our book presentations are very informal, and they're really like a moment for a moment to just you know, gather around and exchange views and questions and have a little bit of a conversation on something interesting, in this case Giulia Sarno's book. So today the dialogue will be between Miriam Akkermann, Laura Zattra, Teruggi, and myself. And but obviously the dialogue is open to anyone, and please do post your questions in the chat as soon as you want. And then there will be moments in the end to raise your hands if you just want to just ask your questions. And just before leaving the stage to Laura Zattra, our moderator for today, will introduce Giulia Sarno and the book. I just wanted to thank Giacomo Albert, who is always our fantastic technician for these events, and his presence is not perceived, but it's incredibly important. So welcome everyone to today's event.
So welcome everyone. Thank you, Giacomo, again. Giacomo is not only present as a technician here, but he's also the founder of the RiSME Digitali with me. So it's very, very important for everything. Thank you, Giacomo. So today we are discussing Giulia Sarno book. And I'm very pleased to welcome Giulia, author of the book we are discussing today. The title is in Italian and the book is in Italian. The title is Una storia di tempo reale, carte e memorie intorno a un'esperienza fiorentina di ricerca musicale 1987-2022. But of course, we are discussing in English in order to reach everyone, and also because the topics and the problematics, the methodology and everything is very important, and we are happy to discuss for more larger public about everything. Giulia is assistant professor with tenure at the University of Florence, has a training, she is graduated and also has a PhD in ethnomusicology, and she has been collaborating for years, I don't know how many, with Tempo Reale. Later you will tell us. So she's not only a collaborator with Tempo Reale, but also a curator of the archive. So before starting with a few questions, I would like to remind to everyone what Tempo Reale is. Giulia, what do you think? Perhaps it's better to tell a few things. Tempo Reale is an electronic music center that has at the core of its goals research, production, and education. It is based in Florence, Italy. It was founded by composer Luciano Berio in 1987. And Berio was also director from its foundation to 2000 and honorary president until his death in 2003. Tempo Reale means real time. The translation, the English translation is real time, a term that marks a precise era of or change in the history of computer music. And therefore, the name itself of the center tells us many things, which Giulia will surely explain later. The main activities of Tempo Reale are around music or towards music. For example, conception and organization of musical events, of works, the study and research around the sound processing, the interaction between sound and space, the synergy between creativity, scientific research, performance, and educational activities. And along the decades, the center has cooperated with many institutions from Tuscany, the region where it is located, to Italy and international centers, not only in the field of music, I reminded, but also with theater and dance and other activities. What it is important to discuss today is the fact that Tempo Reale has never before been the topic of an entire monograph. So Giulia Sarno's book fills this vacuum. And it is a very interesting book because it is one of the more recent outcomes of a lively, dynamic, and very interesting musicological scene that reconstructs histories of the electroacoustic music laboratories and centers around the world. For example, we mentioned Jennifer Iverson's book, a recent book, Electronic Inspirations, dedicated to the center in Cologne, Darmstadt courses, etc. We can mention Andrew Nelson's book around the Karma Center at Stanford University, or Sanne Groth around the EMS in Stockholm, or even Evelyn Gaillou book around dedicated to the GRM, which will be translated next year. So this is one of the recent books which are dedicated specifically dedicated to one center. There are many other books, of course. I'm just mentioning the recent one. My first question, Giulia, is starts from the book title, Una storia di tempo reale, which in English sounds like a story, one story of tempo reale. So it is not the history of tempo reale. So this title, One Story of Tempo Reale, of the Center of Tempo Reale, shows, I think, a deliberate, an intentional, personal stance in reading this story. And we readers understand that we will not read the history of the center, but perhaps one of the possible histories of the center. So my question is, how did you arrive at setting this title? And what is your personal position as an interpreter of this story?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Valentina, Giacomo, for having me. I'm really pleased and honored. And of course, thank you, Daniel Teruggi and Miriam Akkermann, for agreeing to discuss the book with us today. I'm really honored. And of course, I will be very happy to hear from everybody who joined our Zoom conversation. I see some names that I know and some people that I've studied, some scholars which I've studied some works of. So I'd be really thrilled to get in touch and discuss. So thank you, Laura, for the first questions, which gives me the opportunity to briefly tell how come I wrote a book about tempo reale, which I think is important to situate myself and this work. I started collaborating with tempo reale in 2015. I was just thinking about it when you said that, and it's almost 10 years. It feels like, I don't know, it was yesterday in a way, and 20 years, at the same time. But it was 2015, I believe, and I started collaborating as a musician in a residency program that tempo reale organized at the time, which already tells something about the really broad activities that tempo reale has been carrying out in the past few years. Because I was a pop musician, I was acting in the popular music realm at the time, so it was a peculiar residency program directed towards popular musicians. So I got in touch with them, and then I, of course, knew about tempo reale. I was a frequent attendant of the concerts that they organize here in Florence. And so I was really happy to collaborate with them. In a few months, this first collaboration really turned into a form of internship, which then become a more stable position at tempo reale. I did so many things during these years, and now I am the book's curator. But in the middle of this, a period of time, something happened, which was Francesco Giomi is the director of tempo reale and has been since 2008. So Francesco Giomi asked me to edit a book, a celebratory volume for the 30 years of tempo reale. So that was in 2017. And me and Loredana Terminio, another collaborator of tempo reale, organized this photographic book. So in order to do that, we literally opened the wardrobes where all the documents and photographs were kept from the past. And I had a sort of epiphany by just looking at the wealth and the richness of the material documentation that was kept in these at Villa Strozzi, which is the headquarters, the studios of tempo reale. So I realized that in this amazing quantity of papers and other, of course, other kinds of documents, it was so many histories were hidden in these documents. And at the same time, as a complete coincidence, in the same year, for the 30-year anniversary of tempo reale, we had a concert of Morton Subotnick's works. So Morton Subotnick came to Florence to be present for his concert, and we interviewed him. And out of the blue, I had no idea. He started telling me how he was the one who suggested Berio, the name for the first technical director of Tempo Reale. So I had this sort of double epiphany: the incredible richness of the document, of the material documentation, and the super fascinating mobility and freshness and of oral testimony, of memories. So this is how the book started, to the idea of the research that is behind the book, which is a PhD endeavor, started to come together. These two sets of memories, one kept in objects somehow, carried by objects, and the other carried by people. So at this point, I had the wealth of documents in front of me, the incredible richness. So it was very, very soon that I realized that I could have written, that I asked myself, what am I writing here? I could have written 10 different histories. I could have taken 10 different approaches. And some of them I actually thought about in the early stages of my research. So I realized that there is no such thing as the history of Tempo Reale. I don't believe it exists, something as the history of Tempo Reale, but it only exists what a certain researcher with his or her intentions and his or her methodological approach and the choices that he or she makes in terms of what documents to process, or what memories to be more, you know, as a word that would put together oral testimony and material documents. So the selection of the documents and memories that one can process. So these three things, these three elements, items, make a history of anything, really, not just a center, of course, a research center. So this is why I settled for, this was actually discussed with, I think Francesco Giammi told me why. I mean, it's a little weak, you know, it's weaker, a history of Tempo Reale instead of the history of Tempo Reale. But I think weakness is more interesting than, you know, assertiveness in a way in our field. Being, you know, just admitting that you're just doing a very, very small part and it can be completely overturned is more interesting than saying, I know what happened and I'm going to tell you, you know. I don't know if it makes any sense.
Yes, I think Miriam so perfectly suits and follows with what we were discussing before. Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think that your answer already provided a perfect start for what really struck me when reading the book is that all these combination of actions and reactions and all the people that kind of shaped Tempo Reale. And this in combination with the very different activities that have been carried out led me to asking what is about these mutual relationships between the actions that take place, the people, and also maybe this outside view that you describe, how you approached the sources, and also this highly heterogeneous set of sources. So how did you work? How did you start to bring this together? And maybe also what would you kind of summarize as a learning process that we can also share for working with these kind of very interlaced positions?
Sure. It's really interesting that by reading the book, you saw this pattern of action and reactions, because I wasn't, I never thought about it, but this is actually probably what I've been doing as a historian. I mean, I think that action and reaction is not something that is in the history, but it's something that my eyes and my approach made. So combining something that happened, something that somebody told me happened, or a document told me happened, with something else in terms of action and reaction, it's my responsibility as an interpreter these things that make this structure work in a way, if it works, if it's convincing. So that's really interesting, I think, and I think it relates with what Laura was asking at the beginning, the idea that all these actions can actually be related to different reactions by another sets of eyes that look at them, probably. But I hope that my connections make sort of sense to readers, no? So the idea of putting together material sources, let's call them like this, so things that, so information that can be found in objects that are either in the physical realm, that they are touchable, or that are born digital, so they're more difficult, they can be touched with more difficulty, and oral testimony and oral dialogue comes from my double path as a student, actually, because as Laura was reminding at the beginning, I am an ethnomusicologist. I identify as an ethnomusicologist, but I actually had my BA 20 years ago was in literature, actually, so philology, and the idea of working with material sources is really something that resonates with me. But also my MA is in history of the performing arts, and here in Florence, the School of Storia dello Spettacolo is really based on working with first-hand sources, really going to archive, towards archive work. So the tools of ethnomusicology, so the dialogues that we tend to activate with informants, with what used to be called informants, collaborators today, contributors, and so to put together these two different kinds of sources was the main challenge of this research, of course. But I found that working with these two very different typology of information is really key to understand that truth lies nowhere, that written documents are can be as tricky and as lying. they can lie so much as can people with their memories, for many different reasons, for cognitive dissonance processes, or for just not remembering very well what happened, or for, specific purposes. So the idea of not trust anyone or anything is, I think, a good starting point to approach a story that is also, like any institutional story, is a story of power struggles, is a story of personal affirmation. And especially in this case, it's a story of 30-something, so young males that tried to do something that they really cared about and were really passionate about. And this really, is a tricky field to work. So I think that having the idea that truth lies really nowhere, and that the chemical reaction sort of between different sets of documents and different kinds of information can give us some sort of trace to tell a story of action and reaction, which can be a totally different one if approached by someone else. I'm not sure that I answered Miriam's question, because I tend to ramble a little bit, but maybe if my experience is worth something, is trust nothing, trust no one. But at the same time, try to be welcoming of the frictions of different experiences.
Thank you, Giulia. I found this very interesting, and I'm reacting, to use your word, to this that you were saying. Could you please give us an example of the results of this method? For example, I was thinking about the pre-period of tempo reale. Of course, when one center is established and funded, we tend to have many sources because everyone tends to write and do reports, etc. But the prehistory is I found very interesting, and also your reconstruction, because sometimes or very often no one writes about the prehistory, so everything remains on the oral realm. Can you give us an example of this, of what you did to reconstruct this?
This is absolutely perfect. The idea of your question and answering it with something that regards the prehistory is perfect, actually, because the prehistory of tempo reale, which I try to retrace by, of course, not relying on tempo reale's archive, because tempo reale was not existent, of course, so it didn't. And this process went on 15 years prior to the foundation of tempo reale. So, of course, the documents for that are scattered. It's super interesting because, this is a great example of how documents can lie. Because if you only rely on documents, you have the idea that on written documents, you have the idea that tempo reale was thought of as a sort of spin-off of IRCAM, that it's this idea of a satellite of IRCAM was really in the mouth of people, and it was written in documents, and it was used to make it public. This idea that Berio had with Peppino Di Giugno and other people that I'm not gonna specify too much, but in fact, I talked to people that were involved in this process and like firsthand, and together with Berio discussing it. It was a sort of a buzzword to catch the attention, because IRCAM was famous at that time. It was one of the first big institutions in Europe, so it was very famous. So saying we're going to open a satellite of IRCAM carried out the prestige of IRCAM, and it could be used to attract the funding that tempo reale, of course, needed to be opened. But in fact, the idea was never to be a satellite of anything. The idea was to do a musical research that would relate to what IRCAM was doing in terms of acoustic research and technological research, but it was never intended to be a relationship of subordination, you know what I mean, or being, you know, so strictly connected. So this is an example. You have to talk to people and read the documents in a different way, and see what lies behind somehow.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so if I can dwell a little bit more on documents, but differently, like really inspired by Miriam Akkermann's question, and in a way in the opposite side of the spectrum from the follow-up that Laura Zattra proposed. I was really intrigued by the time span of your book. Because it really it shows like the history, like this one history of tempo reale covers like a massive change in documentation, and like websites started to be so the book covers up until 2022, which in itself, I think, is extremely remarkable, considering that the book was published in 2023 and we are in 2023. So like the underlying question is, how did you go up until 2022 having a book published in 2023? But yeah, so in this time period really is like we started to have websites, social media, emails instead of paper-based correspondence. And so I was wondering from a practical and a methodological perspective, if you treated like if you treated the same typology of document but on a different medium in the same way, so like, do you consider that an email, like correspondence is correspondence, or do you think that, for example, emails, they do come with their own set of issues and even legal issues that are different from the treatment of correspondence, or other ideas that you have around this, like huge shift in documentation throughout those years?
Sure. Of course, it's a very difficult question to answer, because it encompasses so many methodological and theoretical problems that I'm just gonna give you my experience of this. I think when we work with a within a certain research framework, for instance, in my case, an Italian PhD, which is supposed to be a 3-year intensive research period. Then COVID happened, so it became 4 years. But anyway, you have to finish at some point. I think you organize your own research in a different way, instead of being, just an open, I'm going to research this, and maybe in 20 years I'm going to write a book about it, or I'm going to write an article about it in 6 months. You know what I mean? It's something that really forces you to organize your time and the sources that you want to process. So you have to make a very precise selection, I think, but not, of course, it cannot be done at the very beginning, but you have to be able to manage this incredible amount of things that you can follow. But so in this case, the first thing is, I think from my experiences, I couldn't have thought of processing all correspondence of all people involved in this incredible history that I had, I think, 60 interlocutors throughout my my research. If I decided that I wanted to process all their correspondence, it would have been an idiotic endeavor. It would be just impossible to do. So I think one makes decisions that depend on the mostly on practical issues. For instance, I didn't have Berio to talk to, of course, because he died in 2003. So his ideas, other than in the published books, would have been probably kept in correspondence. So I went, and it was, of course, mostly physical correspondence, handwritten correspondence. So I went to Paul Zacher Stiftung to analyze the papers. And of course, it's already a very small selection of what he had written in his entire life. And you have no replies mostly. And, you have, of course, a partial history. So that's the, for instance, for paper correspondence, that's the problems is that you usually work with this specific set of objects, and that's it. With the emails, for instance, I think the emails together with many other born digital documents give you the bad impression, this wrong impression that it's richer, that you can find something more, that if you go deeper, you can find that one thing that is missing, but it's an endless endeavor. So it's actually, I think for me, it's actually always a question of less is more. Work with a selection and be aware that, of course, it can never be the whole thing, not even if you work for 30 years on the same topic. So I think with born digital documentation, there's a sort of frustration that comes to it, a different kind of frustration that comes when you're with physical archives. You have a different kind. It's a matter of frustrations and handling the frustration of having the impression of having too little or too much, or not being able to find something. But in terms of processing the information that I found on a letter or on an email, even because the interesting thing of Temporale and the time span that you said is that, for instance, in Temporale's archive, there are loads of printed emails because people used to print them because they would conceive them as letters more than we do now. So with the emails from the 90s, it's great because you have them there in paper and you can process them. But I never thought of soliciting my interlocutors to handing me their email history. You know what I mean? Even one, it would be unimaginably wide to process. B, it's too fresh. It's people that are still alive and they are, you know what I mean? It's like, it's correspondence somehow becomes a territory that one can research once you're dead. Don't you think? There is a connection with death, with correspondence. When people are alive, it's more, I think, difficult that you solicit someone's correspondence to study it, don't you think? So with Berio, I had the, of course, with Berio, I had the, of course, I had to ask for permission. I got permission to see what I saw. I don't know, there's probably more, but I had permission to see what I saw and I processed it. With others, people would hand me maybe, or would send me emails because I solicited certain information about a process of work or something, but I would never say, please give me your hard drive with all your emails and I'm going to go through them, you know? So it's, I don't know. So you know that there's more, but you cannot access it. It's
of course, Giulia.
You know what I mean? I don't know, maybe I was a little confused in this answer, but
no, absolutely. I agree, being myself on that road many times. So the difficulty is to gather many different types of correspondence, and the fact that also from the institutionalization of the center, there is certain tendency to make this correspondence more formal, for example. So you have different level of formality or informality in this kind of sources, in this kind of in the type of correspondence, because one thing is to chat with someone, to write a letter for an anniversary, for example, or on the other hand, to write a formal letter for an appointment and propose some kind of concert, etc., etc. So sure. These different levels of friendship or formality and informality is very different and difficult also to treat sometimes when you write something. And the institutionalization is, I think, a very clear moment in the history of a center that marks also a change in this type of communication.
Yeah, it can definitely be, but at the same time, I spent so many days of my life in contact with the paper archive of Temporale, even because part of my research took place when COVID was happening. So I was the only one at Villa Strozzi. I had the key, and we were in lockdown, but I sneaked out of my house and I went to Temporale. I was the only one. And so I spent months alone with these documents. For instance, I remember clearly when I opened an archive collects things that might not be. Sometimes you find things that are completely, why is it here? People just forget it, probably forgot it here, forgot this piece of paper here, and someone put it in so I found, for instance, a set of postcards for directed to one of the people that worked there, a major, person that worked there. And that was obviously completely personal, had nothing to do with the institutional role of Temporale. But the fact that some was from an important composer in the United States gave me an idea of the kind of connections that were happening around Temporale at the very beginning. And I think that was, of course, I didn't treat that postcard as a document because it was a personal, it was like a happy birthday postcard. It's not, you know, necessarily important for Temporale's history, but it gave me an idea that that person had, and it wasn't the only occasion. He had like a set of postcards from people, from John Chowning, I think, from several people, important people of that time. So it gave me the idea that it had a sort of, you know, the livelihood of the network that at that time was around Temporale. So of course, then there is the institutional communications, and that is the most lying documents of all, because institutional documentation usually, when a center is institutionalized, much time is spent also to gather funding. And in order to gather funding, you have to present yourself in your best, with your makeup on, in your best, you know, with all the right words and all the right things. So then it becomes tricky to understand what is behind the appearance, what is the truth behind the appearance. And being part of Temporale, my ethnographic research really helped me understanding this idea that when you write a project or when you write to solicit funding, you put on your best dress, you know what I mean? And what happens is, it's not necessarily worse, but it's different, the way that processes happen, you know?
Maybe I can hook up on this, because what you mentioned, or what you describe as networks between the people, and on the one hand, so what was actually happening, the relationships between the people, and kind of what you see as an institution from far, or maybe also from the documents. Where did it meet, and where it may have also kind of influenced each other? Because I was wondering, reading it, that institutionalization on the one hand was something that was searched for, and I was wondering if the actual institutionalization at the final end really changed something, either for the artistic activities, for the production, for also this educational idea that in a way was kind of going back and forth between different, or it felt as if it was going between different institutionalization levels, kind of. So how would you describe this the influence, or maybe also the connection between these two entities, or poles, if you want to say?
Yeah, I'm tempted to say something. Okay, I'll say it. Who cares? In Italian, we have a saying that is avere la botte piena e la moglie ubriaca. So you have your wine bottles full, and at the same time have your wife drunk. You know, have two, you know, it's impossible because you have to give your wife the wine. So, but you want to have it all, okay? I think somehow Temporale wanted to have it all, meaning it wanted to be, and especially in Berio, of course, I never met Berio, but this is my idea, and it might be completely wrong. But I think that they wanted both to be the center, the idea that it was connected to Teatro dell'Opera during the prehistory. It was the idea, it was a spin-off of the Teatro dell'Opera and the Akkermann at the same time. It was really a complicated idea. So to be an institutionalized center, but at the same time having the freedom to operate in a very dynamic way. And Berio was, from what I understood from documents, or even mostly from people telling me, was often very frustrated by the rigidity of being an institutionalized center. He wanted to, you know, be, it was frustrated with the having to wait for authorizations, or having to wait for funding, or having to, because he was a very propulsive, I don't know if it's an English word actually, personality. So if you want to have it all, if you want to be an institution with public funding or with, you know, a certain political recognition, you cannot do whatever you want. You know, you have to be respectful of certain rules and certain processes. But I think managing this balance between being a group of people, being a cultural association, as it actually Temporale is, it's a cultural association between people and between institutions. It's a weird situation. So being a center, but a group of people is like at the same time, like a collective of people and a center. It's a hybrid thing. I think this history shows that it's a hybrid that changes in time. That's what I understood, at least.
Right, great, Giulia. And I think that this is the perfect moment to listen what Daniel Teruggi, who was former director of GRM, but not just that, many things at the GRM, and listen to what he has to say in this respect, not only in respect of your book, but also of his experience with another laboratory center institution so important in the world.
Thank you, Laura. It's first of all, good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be in this discussion. When I was proposed to talk here, I was very interested in reading the book. I wasn't sure why would I participate to this discussion. So I swallowed, as you say, the book with a great interest, because it's a wonderful book. Many interesting. It's full with little informations, with little history, and the big history and the intermediate history. And the fact that I know, not most, but many of the people that are inside that book personally, they have been either friends or composers I've met, or people which I've worked with, or just colleagues of the musical world. So I'm Daniel Teruggi. I started working in GRM in 1980. And from 1997 to 2017, I was director of the group, and I was equally director of technological research in the institution in which GRM is based, which is called the National Audiovisual Institute, INA, Institut National de l'Audiovisuel, which is an institution mainly dedicated to the archival of audiovisual contents produced by radio and television in France. It's a very important institution. It's an equivalent of the National Library, but dedicated to audiovisual documents. And within this institution, there's a part that is dedicated to education, higher education, professional education, production, and it's a 1,000 people institution, a very small group called the Groupe de Recherche Musicale, which I just mentioned, of which I was director for 20 years, and I worked there for almost 40 years. So I have a certain experience of dealing with institutions, and I won't say I liked it, but well, you get yourself acquainted with what institutions are and how to deal with them, mainly when you do something that nobody really understands. Because what's behind all this is all those people that are in contact with the institution, like in Italy, what do they understand of various intentions of the Tempo Reale, its missions, and what is electronic music? Actually, we don't call it electronic, but electroacoustic in France and Spain and some countries, but in Italy, the electronic sometimes works. I perfectly understand all this. And Shefay used to say that our institutions are impossible but necessary institutions. Impossible because when you read Giulia's book, you see all the difficulties along the way, and necessary because you also have the impression that it has really done important work within the Italian and the international community. Before talking about the book, I would like to give an overview of our relations with Tempo Reale. First of all, the relations with Berio. Berio was extremely critical with Schaeffer, as in page 307, Giulia explicits very clearly that he thought that Berio thought that Schaeffer's idea was totally stupid, and he was had a totally wrong conception of sound. Berio was not the only one. Another great fighter against Schaeffer was Pierre Boulez, who in 1960 published in an encyclopedia called Fayard a terrible article against the GRM and musique concrète. In fact, there was some kind of personal rivalry between both Pierres, the two stones. But well, that's also history. So Schaeffer and also Schaeffer, Berio, and also up to a certain point, Stockhausen, were not very fond of what Schaeffer was doing. Nevertheless, in 1965, the ORTF, the radio television organization that was active there, commissioned Berio with a recording of Labyrinthus for the Prix Italia. And this was done at GRM. So that was the first collaboration with Berio. The second one was in 1969, where Berio came to the studios. I don't have much information about that, but he composed a 1 minute and something, 1 minute 30 music for the Théâtre de la Ville, is the turning sounds that are presented in the theater before every representation. So he composed that in 1969. And finally, in 1974, he composed a curious and, sorry to say that, boring work in GRM called Chant Parallèle. And that was a commission by the EBU, European Broadcasting Union, and the GRM to be performed in a concert in Paris. This experience, in which he was in the studio for many days with somebody called Bernard Dour, was mainly what we call an electronic work made with 15 oscillators vibrating all at the same time. It's a very charming sound, and starts with a voice singing that little by little is transformed into these electronic sounds. I'll go back to this work in a couple of seconds because something else happened with this work. And it is said, at least François Bell says, that thanks to this experience, he got the idea that he afterwards transmitted to Di Giulio to make a multiple oscillator system, thousands of oscillators through which theoretically any sound could be designed. And that this experience working with a package of loudspeakers and loudspeaker oscillators generated this idea. A strange thing happened at the beginning of the 90s. One day I received a phone call by a guy called Nicola Bernardini, which actually was asking me, do you have any tape recorders? And he had been working for Tempo Reale for some time, and he was looking for tape recorders to read the tapes, the Berio tapes. And I can perfectly imagine Berio telling him, why don't you give a phone call to GRM and ask him if they have a tape recorder? The answer was, of course, we have many of them. And either you come here with the tapes, either we go there with a tape recorder and you can do the work. And I also told Nicola that, there are many, many tape recorders around, and probably many in Italy. Actually, the Reale has 600 tape recorders, just to give you an idea of how diffuse they are. They have been buying tape recorders for years and years. Bernardini never called back again. But, well, Giulia talks about this process of digitizing, doing a good digitization of Berio's first works, and this is related to this. Then in '97, there was in Radio France a festival, Présence, dedicated to Berio. And it was a wonderful occasion because there were many works of Luciano Berio that were heard there. And in that occasion, François Bel and Berio made a new version of Chant Parallèle, which reduces it from 24 minutes to 16 or 17, and in which all the voices are practically excluded from the work, and the work is reduced. And I have this vision of two, let's say, aged people. François was 65 at that moment. Berio was some years older. In the back of the studio, one shoulder against the other, Berio with a big cigar, and listening and working on cutting, digitally cutting chunks of Chant Parallèle to make the version, which is actually the version that circulates now when concerts are made. So then I have personal interactions with Tempo Reale in 2001, 2008, invited for conferences or concerts. I haven't been very often there, actually, as Giulia suggests. But since I consider myself a good friend of Francesco, so there has always been a kind of sympathy between us and our institutions. What is, now, one little point about institutions themselves. I fight it for 20 years as a director to keep the GRM going on. But I was already within an institution, and that institution depends also of the cultural ministry. And the fight was to convince deciders of the necessity of this institution and the needs that we have to continue our labor. I had 5 audits during my period. An audit is somebody who you don't know at all, who doesn't know anything of what you're doing, who comes and checks if what you're doing is correct, well done, and has some value. So the 5 audits were positive, with practically very small remarks as you should produce more CDs, you should sell more, things like that. But the most difficult part was the internal discussions. Institutions tend to ask for results and tangible results. And what more tangible of a result than money? So how much money can you produce? How we invest this amount of money each year, how much money can you bring back to the institution to counterpart the work? And the difficulty here is to convince that the return in investment is not in money, but in visibility, in audience, in repercussion in the cultural society. It is difficult to convince a decider with these arguments, but that was my job, and I think I managed it quite well. Today, I've left GRM for 6 years, and I consider that things are well established in INA, because GRM has become the kind of innovation department, and which makes things less boring than archives. I don't have anything against archives. I work a lot with archival projects. Now, when I read the first chapter of the book, it's an incredible chapter. All the Berio period and a little further on. Because the impression the book gives, and I think it's quite real, is that after 2006 or 2008, when Giomi takes over the direction, things are quite smooth from there onwards, internally and externally. But in the first period, the history, the prehistory, as you call it, and the formation of the group, this, from my point of view, only worked because Berio was an extraordinary politician, meaning that he had the image and the cultural impact, and then the words to convince impossible institutions to help their activity. I'm referring not only to the city, the region, the national support, but also to private companies that would put money. Here in France, that would be extremely difficult to obtain, that Montepaschi di Siena would put money in a project, or in other examples as Reale with Agon and things like that. I mean, Italy is always, every country is a different world with different laws. And it was mentioned a while ago, how within those discussions to keep your independence and to do what you want. That may seem very difficult. It is very difficult. And it's at the same time not so difficult because nobody really understands what you want to do. Nobody really understands when you when you talk about research, what does that mean? For many years, I had the question, okay, you do research, where are the patents? Where are the great prizes of research? No, we don't have any. We do software. There's no patent on software and things like that. So this incredible situation of bringing institutions together, and different institutions with ups and downs, that's clear, with ups and downs internally, with people living and working and being passionate of Tempo Reale and then leaving the place. And I must mention the ascending little by little figure of Francesco Giomi. Francesco Giomi, we first performed him in GRM in 1995 with a work called Flamenco, which was composed actually at Tempo Reale, but he has nothing to do at that moment with Tempo Reale. And then we start meeting regularly. He came 2 or 3 times with GRM, commissioned him different works. And so we established a kind of very open friendship. He would talk about Tempo Reale. Whenever Berio would come to Paris for one of his concerts, he would invite me to the concert. This is how I managed to see some of the works. And to finish my intervention, the last homage I made to Luciano Berio was last July. Last July in the festival in Siena, I first performed a work called Fonomaggio, which was a homage to the Omaggio a Joyce, of course, to the Laboratorio di Fonologia, in which it is clear that Berio picked up some of his good ideas about what a studio has to be, could be, and about education. And once again, their institutions started putting sticks in his work when he was there in Laboratorio Fonologia, and also to the extraordinary work of Omaggio. And to end my presentation, if I have still 2 minutes, I would like to make a remark to Giulia. Independently of her extraordinary work, there was a page which really deceived me. Now, what is this? It's page 213. We all know that Berio didn't like tape music. He had lived through it. That's a good thing. He had the experience, but then he considered it was not a good way to making music. That explains the Tempo Reale, his interest for live music and real-time transformation. So in this page, may I quote with a very bad translation, Giulia Sarno's sentence. She says, "The multiform relation between performance gesture and electronic sound has configured a complex discussion field between the dimension of the studio creation of fixed music and support, characteristic of the electroacoustic laboratories of the 50s, and the dimension of the live concert, with problems related to acousmatic listening." Giulia's point of view, I respect totally, except that bringing acousmatic music to the 50s and quoting something said by John Cage in 1958, when 70 years have gone through of acousmatic music, which is one of the most active domains of creation, really is a contradiction with what history is. Well, I'm an acousmatic composer, I'm live composer, I'm mixed composer. I have done all of those, but I strongly defend acousmatic as a point of a musical point of view, a musical point of creation. It's a little comment I make in the book, which is really an extraordinary work, and I can say much more about the book also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Giulia, could you react to this wonderful presentation and also comments?
Sure. Thank you so much for this rich reaction. We are talking a lot about action and reaction today. Thank you so much for reacting so richly to my work, for taking the time to reading it. I know it's a long book and it's probably boring in some parts, but thank you so much. I wanted to react to what you were saying about the first chapter and the fact that that Temporale's history wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Berio's extraordinary political abilities. I think you really underlined a very, very important point there, absolutely. And I'm glad that it resonates with it partially with your own experience, being the idea of keeping your independence, having to explain what you do to people that have completely no idea what you're doing, but people that you depend on as an institution, of course. And I think that was Temporale, and still is Temporale's experience, because although from 2008, I call it the era of new stability, I think, in the book, with Francesco Giomi's management. Of course, it doesn't mean that everything is completely smooth. It is smoother than it used to be, but it's still a fight every day for funding, for instance. It's not, I mean, Temporale's existence is not under a threat per se, but the idea of making ends meet with the funding that you get and wanting to do what you want is always a struggle. And in particular, the problem in Italy, I believe, what I've gathered from being at Temporale these years, and also reading about, reading the documents and retracing its history, is one of the main problems in Italy for a center like Temporale is that it falls under a legislation that really rewards performance, concerts. If you organize concerts, then you get funding, and you get funding. If you organize 50 concerts a year, you enter a certain funding scheme from the ministry. If you don't, you don't. And since we're not at a university, we don't get funding for research, for pure research, for applied research. So that's a very, I'm really sorry that Francesco is not here today. He had a class in Bologna, and he's really sorry not to be here, because it would be something that he would be, of course, more suited to discuss instead of me, because he's, of course, the one that has been fighting for the past 15 years, like yourself, like you've done. So this idea that you have to be a research center because that's what you want to be. You have the idea that researching music is something researching around music is something worth doing and that you want to do. And then the artistic outcomes can come and can be, of course, they're very welcome. And Tempo Reale has always been very interested in the artistic outcome and not the pure research on sound or software. But if you, that part you have to fund with the remainings of what you get for other activities.
Exactly.
That's what happens at Tempo Reale.
Totally.
And so the difficulty to have personnel that is devoted to research, because you always have to have a person that is a technician for the live concert and does research on the side. You cannot hire a person that does only research, you know, so that really shapes the profile of a center like Tempo Reale, which is also, I believe, its strength in a way. It can be because it forces it to be very public in what it does. And so in a way, there is this counterpart. This is what I see. And Francesco, I think, has been very, very intelligent at managing this. While Berio, of course, was incredibly smart, but he suffered this situation a lot.
Everybody wants to feel that you're secure in what you're doing. That's a good thing about universities. Once you have a job there, okay, you know you can just work on for years and you don't have really to worry. There can be some worries. But how in an institution like this one, where you have people working with you, which can be extraordinary, and you don't know if you're going to be able to pay them the following year. It's a really stressing situation. And Schaeffer, who was an extraordinary manager in the 60s, the researchers would have a 1-month contract, which would be renewed each month. He had the idea that people didn't have to have a fixed and permanent position. If you think of that in the 60s, it's really a curious point of view, because today people move a lot more around, and even young people, they don't want to be attached to an institution forever. And I wanted to say something about something that was said earlier. From the outside, from the external, from France, we never considered Tempo Reale to be an outburst of IRCAM. Padova, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Padova was a second small IRCAM because they had the same technology, the technicians, there was a strong relation between technicians, but not at all Tempo Reale. And you point very clearly the discussions between Boulez and Berio about what the relation between research and production and creation should be, not production, and creation should be. And I totally approve Berio's position. If you let researchers take the lead, you'll never get anything. I exaggerate what I'm saying, but the researcher is advancing. I don't care to stop and help you to compose with what I'm doing. So the idea that the creator would motivate the researcher is a very strong one. And that also created a certain split. Another remark is, and this is what makes Giome's situation much more difficult than Berio's, is the importance of the press for Berio. When something didn't work, he would just go out and shout it in the press, and the press would follow him. As for example, the example in Salzburg, with the metteur en scène that he didn't like, he immediately made a press declaration. And every time there was a problem in Florence, he would make a press declaration. The review Panorama, I think every week, would publish something about Berio, if I follow your remark. So that was really strong, and that probably helped him a lot. And well, in France, that would never happen. IRCAM was extremely popular at the beginning because the press was behind it, and it was a national project. And Tempo Reale was never a national project. It was only a regional and local project. Every now and then, but the government never really went
invested in it,
for it or in any kind of legislation. That's all.
Yeah, no, I wanted to also react to what you were saying. I thank you so much for retracing the history of the relationship between Temporeale, Berio, then Temporeale, and GRM. And I think that the changing relationship throughout the years really reflects different eras of electroacoustic music. I think.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that. Yes, yes,
because
yes.
the of course the idea, I think at that time, I was not there, of course, but from what I understand is that when Berio was opposed to Schaeffer and to GRM and to Musique Concrète, the idea is that you have to be militante, with, you know, to be able to express your own idea of what electronic music was, when electronic music and electroacoustic music was again under the radar of fighting. You know what I mean? Is like it was again a territory for really asserting one's view and one's perception of what it should be, and to orient an idea of music. I think that after the 80s and 90s, with it became much more a postmodern field of including all kinds of and so a new, and I think I wrote it in the book, the idea that really embracing a diversity of experiences and forms and approaches is what characterizes post-Berio's Temporeale, instead of compared to the Temporeale of real-time electronics. And that's my main.
If I have still,
of course, Daniel. Of course.
So there have been evolutions, and from my PhD work was done on the technological evolution of GRM. The GRM and all the other studios went through 5 great technological periods. The mechanical period, which I didn't know, I wasn't there, in the 50s, where there were machines mainly working with motors and tape going around. The electronic period in the 60s, which lasted until the 90s. The mainframe computer period, which starts, let's say, in the 60s and goes up to the early mid-90s. The home computing systems, which starts in the 90s, very slowly, but very, and finally the period, the laptop or the hand top computing, which is what we are today. At the same time that this evolution is going on, mainly at the first 40 years through the research work of centers, the competences of composers evolved also. It was not the same thing to compose a work in the 50s, where Pierre-Henri helped Olivier Messiaen or Sauguet or who else, Varese, to make tapes, and to a composer at the 90s or the 2000s, which already in their education have an introduction to electroacoustics, and from the 2000 onwards, they all have an experience with computers. And what is interesting to see, and I hadn't noticed that, because I was puzzled with the fact that Di Giugno left IRCAM to go to Farfisa, to Pagliano, and he took my good friend Emmanuel Favreau, which was the best thing that happened, because then Favreau came to work at GRM. Why did Di Giugno invest in this Mars machine, of which you speak very nicely? Favreau brought a Mars machine to GRM, so I made a work for the Mars, and I will forget it forever. Berio and Di Giugno were a generation late, from my point of view, for the technology. When they imagined things, it was really too late to imagine things. The world was moving on, and new technology was coming in. The idea that you needed to have original machines and original technology really disappears at the end of the 90s. Nobody thinks of developing machines like the Mars or like 4X or like CITER in the GRM. And the market takes over and dedicated software takes over. And finally, software takes over everything. So this is an interesting way how the way of thinking was a little bit behind what the evolution of technology was.
Interesting, Daniel, and absolutely wonderful, I think, to reflect on this. Giulia, if you allow us to open our discussion, of course, related to this we were talking about, but also any other questions or curiosity or anything that you want to ask Giulia or the floor, please raise with the function of Zoom your hand or write in our chat anything that you have in mind. Okay,
yes, please also do not, like, even if you haven't read the book, there's no need to have read the book or to know the work. Like, maybe you just want to know more about the content, so please feel very welcome to just ask your questions freely.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Please.
First, a little comment. At the beginning of the 2000s, when Bernardini comes back to Tempo Reale, he started applying for European projects with not a high success. But we applied together for a project and we didn't get anything. So there was another bringing together with, it was Reale in England and Tempo Reale, and there was some other institution. We worked together to build a project and finally didn't work. My question was, I'm not very sure, Giulia, it's not a critic, it's just an observation about what the word research means in this context. You work in a university, you have a very clear perception of what research is, theoretical or applied research. In the case of Tempo Reale, is it really research? I'm not criticizing what they do. It's more a fundamental question. You say very clearly that they work on applied research to production. Is that still research, or is just trying to find solutions to a problem posed by a composer? It's an open question. Sure.
I think it's an excellent question, and I think it's at the core of a possible. I dreamt about it at some point, to have a joint research project in terms of university research project about what musical research is and was in different institutions in Europe, at least, or in the world, because the more one reads about these institutions, this experiences, and the less I think we know what music research is. Meaning, it's not precise. It's not what I wanted to say. Meaning, a firm idea of music research is impossible to find. I think this binomio, this two-word entity really is a chimera. It really is something that one tends to, and one declines, and every center declines in different ways. So music research, I would say, in a very postmodern way, is whatever we call music research, meaning that if Tempo Reale conceives in different time, it has conceived music research in very different ways throughout the decades. And I don't think we can say, me at least as an interpreter, that one is more properly music research than the other thing. You know what I mean? I believe, as an ethnomusicology, I really believe in emic perspectives. So what one identifies in his or her activity as research, of course, if it's not a personal individual stance, but it's shared by a group of a certain community, then I would accept that self-definition. this is a general answer. In terms of if we want to, I think it's an historically changing concept, and there is no such thing as music research in general, but we have to really look at different contexts and environments and research environments to understand what it was meant and what it is meant. And if problem solving is not research, I don't know. In a way, all research is problem solving. It's different problems that you pose.
Because the word research has a precise meaning in some context. I totally understand. Yeah. Many artists say, well, I research about this, I research about that, and this is accepted as a vocabulary for an artist. When discussing politics, mention the word research is very strong. When Berio started working, the research was then, but research is publishing, is a certain number of things, is being in a research context, is having a mission of research. IRCAM does research, quite technical, but they are an associated laboratory to the National Research Center of France, the GNR, the French GNR. And so they have laboratory professors that belong to the university that follow the research of the people. The relation with music sometimes is a bit distant. And I tend to like a concept that has come out over the last years, which is musical studies, which is not so not so coercive and what the result of a research is. So this is, but well, I totally understand. I would have said the same words that Tempo Reale used. But when you describe what they do, because the 2 or 3 original things they made were not made by them, but by Torino or by some other institution. That's why I was asking a little bit of the thing. And research means also that you have researchers, people that do that. And here researchers are production managers also. So it's an ambiguous, but positive situation. I agree.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I think we have another question. Juan Parra. Good evening.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening.
Hi, Juan.
It's not that late. Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I don't want to derail the discussion over, but I think that what Daniel poses is a very interesting question, and I think that Giulia's openness to discuss it is also extremely valuable, and it's this nature of the notion of research when it comes to the understanding of the legacy of an archive, for example, where most of the material is artistic outputs. And I think that in there's this opportunity. I do take the point of Daniel of putting an example like IRCAM, but my personal point is that one of the problems of IRCAM is that then research and artistic creation remain separated, even targeted to different people. And I think that we live in a world where there is the notion of artistic research in music or the research in and through musical practice that without all of them being best examples, I think that we have to be careful about equaling research to artistic production, as careful as we need to be of limiting the notion of research as the first part of research and development of tools for someone else to enjoy artistic practice only. And I think that the work of the rescuing of the history of all these centers where these activities were happening perhaps before the labeling and the targeting and the academization, before these things were gigs or there were courses that could be followed at university. I think it's extremely valuable because in the revision of history, there is an opportunity to reevaluate and reconstitute what materials can be used and can be preserved for future production. And in that action, you actually transform material that perhaps up until now has been just artistic products into something new, into new materials. And that is something that is in line, for example, with Jürgen Reinberger and the idea of technological objects and epistemic things. That is one of the references of philosophy of science applied to scientific research. This idea that the things that we do, even in a lab, are not necessarily research, but the products of those works that might constitute new things that in turn could act as models for future research to happen. So in that context, I think that the musicological work that books like Giulia are doing are actually conduits for things that have happened in the past that perhaps were not necessarily research, that could transform themselves into potential research.
I think that's a very interesting and fresh perspective, Juan. Thank you so much for this input. I was also, I mean, I strongly believe in historicizing concepts. So, and I think what Juan was saying really adds another historical layer to this, which is the future, which is great, making the future as part of certain history. I mean, when we write history, we write it and it will affect the future somehow. So it is part of the historical span that we deal with when we as interpreters of facts and when we write accounts of facts and what we do. So I think what Juan was saying really resonates. I have to think about it more because it's such a rich input, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Giulia. Thank you, Ampara. Are there any other questions? Don't hesitate.
I also wanted to add something about it. Sorry, guys. Is that also the word research, I think, was and still is used in contexts like tempo reale or maybe other similar. Is Danielle still on? Maybe.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you froze. Sorry.
Yes. No.
Is that it comes along with certain prestige. So saying we're doing research is something that really connects these institutions with universities, with institutions that have more cultural power, cultural capital in terms of Bourdieu. So I think the use of the term research can also have, in certain situations and in certain contexts, have this maybe even not intentional use, you know, like it's something that people with money can understand. We're doing research, and I think it can be I think maybe at the beginning of Temporale there was a certain idea of what research was, but surely it was used a lot to solicit funding for its establishment, very much.
Since we talk about research, and I totally agree with what has been said by you and the other person, and of course it's very powerful. I remember when I started working at GRM, I had a visiting card. The GRM I was as a simple assistant at the studio, so the INA didn't know where to put me. So they wrote on my card, assistant de recherche, research assistant. And I remember looking for an apartment. I would say, I'm assistant de recherche, and people would say, oh, they were very impressed. And I was just working in the studio, you know, so that helped me a little bit. There are two other points in your book which we really have to mention. One is when you talk about the last chapter about production and diffusion of music, and which doesn't interest deciders a lot, but well. And just to say that if you look at the list of works you've listed, half of them are acousmatic. Half of them are acousmatic works that are played in the concert. Do you listen?
No, I think you broke down, or my connection broke down. Please.
That when you read the lists of works that have been performed through Tempo Reale, half of them are acousmatic.
Sure.
Even in Berio's time, no?
Yeah.
But then, no, I would like to say a word about the educational part, which I wasn't conscious of all of the importance of that part of the activity, and how much Berio was committed to education, to young education, to transforming the educational system that was really extremely ambitious, and it could have had some influence, but it really went another direction. How the different activities contributed to the general scheme of the functioning of the center. In France, we had this guy you must know, which is François de Lalande. You mentioned him, and he was translated a lot in Italian. And he through his books, he really changed the mentality of teachers, not of the ministry. And teachers will start using his methods or his way of addressing sound and how to think sound, with no technology behind, just and from an listening point of view. But that's, I think, it's a really very important aspect of the Tempo Reale's activity, the way that education was addressed. Yes, you see, I read every word of your book.
You read it all.
And I agree, Danielle. It's true, François de Lalande. It's very, very important in Italy for teachers. I personally have taught de Lalande's books and articles, and not only me, but for future teachers, young teachers. It's used as a handbook, and it's very useful. Yes, and it is part of GRM, and I had the honor when I was teaching those things to present the GRM, and young generations were very interested in this approach. So it's true that coming back to the idea of research we were talking about, I think that this is also research, the fact that you are writing for not only it's true, maybe it's applied research in this case, because you use the results, the artistical results made in a center, and you use them for future generations, but after all, this is another type of research. Great.
Do you want me to say something about the educational activities of Tempo Reale, or was it no? Just it's maybe Valentina wanted to add something before. And
no. I was just wondering if anyone has had some questions, but no, please go ahead, because it's very interesting. I found it a very interesting part. Yeah.
Yes, it is, and it also because it really. Again, like all the chapters, I think we haven't mentioned how the book is structured. I will do it briefly at the end of the presentation. But basically, maybe it was kind of clear because Danielle was saying something, that the first chapter is basically an institutional history, meaning the facts, perspectives, and different aspects that the center has gone through since the foundational period to today, basically. And then the other chapters, chapter 2, 3, and 4, I completely forgot, 2, 3, and 4 are dedicated to, we go into what Tempo Reale has been doing during this past 35 years. So nel fare di Tempo Reale is research and production together, and then it's no coincidence that research and production gets one single chapter together, because as I explained, research and production are completely intertwined in Tempo Reale's history. One cannot be distinguished from the other dimension. Chapter 3 is, I call it costellazione didattica, so the didactic educational constellation, and I'll get to that. And the 4th chapter is about how to promote all the projects that have been envisioned to promote an electronic music culture. So concerts, but not only, and residencies and stuff. So chapter 3 is this educational constellation, because, and all the chapters begin with what I could tell Berio's idea was in terms of what research and production was, and what music education was or should be, and so it begins with Berio's ideas, and then it goes on to see what actually happened at Tempo Reale during these years. So in the educational chapter, I spend a few pages on this project that Berio made with Jacopo Bamboni Schilingi, mainly as his first, which they met at Présence Électronique in 1997. That's the occasion where they met. So, so it's very important for Tempo Reale's history, that concert. So they did together this project that was supposed to become a sort of standard for music education in schools. That was the dream. Yeah. To have workshops in every school. It was that of course could only happen because at that time in the mid-90s in Italy there was Berlinguer, ministry of at that time that education, yeah, of education, who envisioned the
is he related? Is he related to the other Berlinguer, the communist leader?
Great question.
No, it's not important. Just brother. Yeah, brother. No, I didn't know if it was,
he just died, I think, also.
Oh,
this year.
Thank you, Giacomo.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So and of course in the this atmosphere of reform that in Italy was going through the 90s, of course there was a sort of space for Berio to try and fit in with this utopia of having workshops, of compositional workshops in every school, basically, with the use of computers. So I think what is very interesting in the history of Tempo Reale, and this is one of the cases, is the friction between the idea, the dream, and what then could actually be done. Because of course, Berio's dream was to impact the whole nation with an idea that he thought was revolutionary and really important for kids. This is one of the projects I think that was really Berio was really passionate about. But of course, the reality, and not just because acting on such a diffuse level was absolutely impossible for a small center based in Florence, and not like a huge central center, but not just because of that, but just because the speed of technology and technological advancement and the rhythm of implementing such programs are so completely different that it would have been impossible, because once you get this going in 5 years, you have 5 years since you conceive something and then you can put it into practice. And in 5 years, things were completely different. Now you could do that with an iPad. Tomorrow you'll probably do it with, I don't know, with your hands in the air. I don't know, you know what I mean? But so it really tells us a lot of the difficulties that these centers face with the keeping up to speed with technological development, but at the same time, institutional rhythms, which are of course much slower, and implementing a reform or acting in society with your projects really is a different, it has a different pace, and the two things together only rarely align perfectly.
Considering the slowness also of the Ministry of Culture and schools, etc., to adapt to these innovations, it would be extremely difficult, impossible. Yes.
No, and then there is the problem of training thousands of teachers, the syndicate, the unions, and everything behind. You cannot imagine what the catastrophe would be. Giulia, do you know something about Berio's feelings around all this? Tempo Reale was a great success. I mean, for his music, he made large and important works were made in the center, and he was probably quite happy with it. But regarding this activity of education, was he frustrated? Did he ever talk about that? Do you have any feedback about those things?
I had some feedback, but Berio at the time was already ill.
Mm-hmm.
Died in 2003. So what I think is that he really contributed to starting this. He really committed himself to finding the money, taking up the phone and calling Monte dei Paschi di Siena, or but I think quite soon he had to distance himself because of course he was sick and wouldn't participate. But there is a very interesting video on YouTube. I think it's still there. I downloaded it anyway. That where Berio says he's really angry that the project was not taken up by the ministry at the end, and he says something like, the ministry won't give us money, we'll find it ourselves. He was really, so you could tell from the way he talks that he was really frustrated with but this is a recurring thing, with having a great idea that he thought was great and really having to bounce against the slowness or the fact that people wanted, that institutions wanted reassurance about things and not just, Berio says it, we do it, it's just, of course. So there is this very interesting video, but apart from that, of course, Jacopo Baboni Schilingi, Michele Tadini, and all the people that worked at this project told me that he was really passionate about it and really frustrated that it didn't really went.
It didn't go on. Yes. Another question.
Oh, sorry.
And last question, and then we finish. I finish. I won't talk anymore. You mentioned in several moments a series, I think it was radio programs made by Berio in the 60s. Musica e qualcosa.
In the 60s?
Or in the 70s, I don't know, but it was made for the RAI.
C'è musica e musica.
C'è musica e musica, but not radio. It was TV. It was television. It was television.
Television, okay. Are these available somewhere?
Yes, on Rai Play. I'll
Rai
send you.
Play, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
That's beautiful.
Because you mentioned them a lot as like a point of putting his ideas clearly on the table.
Yeah, it's a wonderful series. I think Laura
has
seen it a lot as I have. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yes, Valentina, if you find quickly, you can put on the chat also the link to see this.
It might be geo-blocked.
Yes. Yeah, I was looking for it. Yeah.
I think it's time to wrap up our discussion. Very, very interesting and profound. And I want to mention that the website of Tempo Reale, because we talk about the past in these 2 hours, but it's the website is this. I'm putting on our chat, so you can follow the present activities and also what you are doing with the archive, which is another chapter which we could discuss about for about 2 hours. But I'm also putting on our chat the link to the archive and your platform. You're doing many interesting things to preserve, reevaluate, and create also new works of art, starting from what you have archived, what you as Tempo Reale have archived. So you can follow the activities in the website.
Can I put another link in the chat
Yes.
that might be interesting for everyone? This is the part of Tempo Reale's website that is connected to the book. So it's like a sort of digital companion to the book.
Yeah.
So it has basically lists of works that were produced at Tempo Reale and the educational activities and concerts. So it can be interesting to have a look at what the, it is of course year by year, to have a look at what happened. So I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, great. So thank you very much, Giulia. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, Danielle, and everyone who has participated in our discussion. So I'm very happy, Giulia, that you has accepted to be with us. And so my role in this discussion is finished. So I let Valentina take the floor and close our afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. No, I just wanted to thank everyone again for your amazing contributions and your questions, Miriam and Danielle, for your really thoughtful and broadening answers, Giulia, and yeah, for your book. And I really hope that everyone is gonna read it, because it's a great contribution. And thank you, Laura, for your emceeing and moderation of the session. And thanks again, Laura and Giacomo, for the creation of this opportunity, thanks to the study group, RiSME Digitali. So thanks to every single participant. I just remind you that this discussion is not lost if you just joined halfway or if you had to leave, but it has been recorded, and it will be available on the Facebook page of the Società Italiana di Musicologia, and also on the web page of RiSME Digitali. Thanks for everyone who participated and contributed with questions and thoughts. And so I just say goodbye to you. I hope you have a great rest of the day, if there is no other announcements at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.